Hello and welcome to this video walkthrough of assignment number 6 for CPI 211. In this assignment we're going to be creating custom cursors, a custom cursor for your Unity game, and then using some code to replace the built-in cursor as well. We'll get in and do a little bit of work in Photoshop also. Let me show you where we're going to end up. So here I am inside Unity. I've got my platform game that you'll remember we created a while back, and I've modified it a little bit. I'm here, I've got a terrain in here, but basically here's the same set of platforms. What we're going to do today is you'll note that as I move around in my scene, there is no cursor, but when I stop, a cursor appears, and that it is not the regular cursor, it is a little target cursor. Further, you'll notice that here are a cube and a sphere, and when I roll over these, nothing happens. But if I get close to them and roll over, then they interact, changing color. And also you'll see a little message is getting passed from these objects to the console, saying that we have indeed rolled over them. So that's where we're going to end up. Let's work our way there now. As we get started, it's important to briefly review what we've done in the past in terms of customizing our first-person controller, because you're going to want to use that customized first-person controller today with our custom cursor assignment. Now, if you remember what we did before, and you want to make sure that this is in place before you move on, we modified our inputs. And you'll remember we created a couple of new axes in our inputs, one called turn, which had a negative button left, positive button right, and a sensitivity of 3. And then along with that, we modified our first-person input controller by adding a new function at the very end where we looked for that turn input, and then if the person, the user, was using the left or right keys, we sensed that they were then using that turn input, and then we rotated them around. So you're going to want to make sure you've got that modified first-person adventure input controller JavaScript file active and applied to your first-person controller. And remember, you need to have that modified input controller here on the topmost level of your first-person controller. If you don't remember how to do that, go back into the earlier chapter in your book to make sure that that is in place. That's not the only change we made. If you remember, we also added an axis called ML enable, which was the mouse look enable. And for that one, our negative button was left shift, our positive button was right shift. Then, in conjunction with that new input, we modified the mouse look script. And what we did in the mouse look script is that in the update function, we started off with an if statement that looked to see whether the player had pressed the appropriate buttons, the left or right shift key, and we also looked to see whether or not they were moving horizontally or moving vertically. And only in those cases did we then allow the mouse look functionality to work. So make sure that you've got that script already set up as well. Again, we did it in an earlier assignment, called it mouse look restricted, and we've got it applied on the first-person controller twice. Once we've got it on the parent game object right here, and then we also have it applied to the main camera right here. Main camera version is impacting the Y mouse axis, and the parent one is impacting the mouse X axis. Last but not least, as a review to make sure that you've got everything set up correctly, back to our input again, you'll remember that we modified our horizontal axis that's built in or sort of already set up by default, basically just getting rid of our negative and positive buttons, which were those left and right arrow keys. And so that instead of being set in the horizontal, it was being set in our turn axis. We just took the inputs from the horizontal and instead put them onto the turn. Here they are right here. Okay? So that's all pure setup. Now we can go ahead and move forward once we've making sure that we have our appropriate first-person controller. So you'll see with the modified first-person controller, when I'm just sitting in place and I move my mouse, which I'm doing in the background here, I don't turn. However, if I hold down the Shift key, I can look around. If I use my arrow keys, I can rotate around and I can be looking at the same time. And if I use my A, S, W, and D keys, I can also look around as I'm moving through space. Now with all of that as setup, what you should do is take the scene that you created when you made your platform game, which was, what, assignment 4, I think, for our class. You're going to want to take that scene and save as. So we're going to essentially create a new scene, copying everything that's in the scene for our platform game. So let's go ahead and do that next. Okay, so here I am in my assignment 4 scene, and you'll see that this version is just the finished version of my platform game with the regular old cursor in place, but with the customized first-person controller. I'm really harping on this, making sure you have the customized first-person controller, because if you're using the regular version, everything we're about to do won't work properly. So I'm going to do a file, save scene as, and I'm going to save the scene, and I'm going to call it cursor control, and I'm going to save it into my scenes folder. Or you can call it custom cursor as well. You can actually call it whatever you want, but just give it some name that will signify what it is we're doing. All right? Then what I want you to do is we're going to create a new empty game object. And this game object is going to be kind of a command center. When you design games in Unity, one of the challenging ways to operate in Unity is that you can apply scripts essentially to any game object. And when you have lots and lots of game objects inside your game, it can start to get fairly confusing to figure out where it is that scripts should go. And if you've got bunches of scripts, it can start to be confusing to remember where it was you put a specific script in order to go back when you need to modify it. So it's a good idea to have a sort of central command script, a script that is used as a kind of control center that will send out messages to game objects and receive messages from game objects. It acts as a sort of manager for the main events that are occurring inside your game. And because it's centrally located on just one game object, you can quickly go in and find pieces of code that you need. So we're going to do that now. We're going to go up to game object, create empty, and let's call that game object cursor control. Now this is going to be game object specifically that's going to control our cursor. It's going to turn it on and off, and this is for now is just a sort of a temporary command script. We'll try out a more elaborate one here in a little bit. So actually I was going to call this script I'm going to call this script holder. Okay, this is our temporarily set script that's going to control events happening in my game. All right. Once I've got that game object set, I'm going to create a new script. So in my case, I'm selecting my adventure scripts folder and choosing create and new JavaScript file. And the script that I want you to create is going to be called hide cursor. So I've already made mine here to save some time. And here's what the hide cursor script is going to look like. It has a start function that we're not actually using, so I can just get rid of it. And the update function is going to look somewhat familiar. It's going to start with an if statement, and that if statement is looking for, let me close this down a little bit. The if statement is going to look for the same set of inputs we were looking for before. We're looking for the horizontal input, vertical input, turn input, or the ML enable input. Basically, any input that means we are moving in some way through our world. In those cases, we're going to turn off the cursor. And if we're not moving, we'll turn the cursor back on. So this screen.showCursor is a built-in function in Unity that will turn on and off the default system cursor, just a regular old cursor. Okay, so let's save that. Come back into your scene, grab that hide cursor script and drag it and drop it onto that script holder. Hit play. And what you'll see is, well, here's still my cursor, but if I click so that I'm now inside my scene, oh, I'm still seeing it. Why is it that I'm still seeing it? I'll show you why. We are not moving, right? And the script that we just created said, turn off the cursor if you're moving. And this is what we want for a point-and-click adventure game, right? The whole idea of modifying our first-person controller is so that when you are not moving, you can easily select items in your game and click on them. But if I hold down the Shift key so that I can look around, now my system cursor is missing. Or if I move forward, system cursor is moving, move backward, its system cursor has disappeared, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So that's a really basic way just to get that cursor to disappear. What I want to do next is, if I'm going to make that system cursor disappear, I'm going to replace it with a custom cursor. To do this, you should go to the Blackboard site for our course, where I have placed some custom cursor textures. So let's go take a look at that. Here I am inside the Blackboard site for our course, CPI 211. I've gone into the content section and I've come down to week 6, lecture and materials, and you'll see underneath this section we have, as always, the PowerPoint for the lecture, but this time we also have a couple of other files. We've got this ex2 JPEG file, which is an image that we're going to use in Photoshop when we play with the line tool. And then we have a zip folder of textures. We're going to use this right now. So download both of these, save them to your computer in a place where you can find them. Then we're going to grab the contents of the texture zip file that you downloaded, and we're going to bring those textures into Unity. And here they are. The first one we're going to use is one that's called Game Pointer. It's inside that zip file. To bring it into Unity, all you really need to do is come to your project view, go to Create, choose Folder, create a new folder to store these images, these textures. I called mine Adventure Images. Then I grabbed the contents of that zip file and I just dragged and dropped each one directly into Unity, and it will then show up here just fine. Now when you go to import those images, if you look in the inspector, you're going to get a dialog that looks just like this. Okay? It's going to have a drop down for what type of texture you want this image to be inside your game, and then you've got some settings about, for example, the maximum size of the texture and the way you want to compress that image. When you bring these in, you're going to modify these settings based on the use of the material that you have inside your game. So let's start by bring in the image from that zip file called game pointer. Actually, bring them all in, but we're going to start by using the game pointer. So I've got game pointer selected in my project view, and then over in the inspector where it says texture type, I'm going to change that to GUI, and I'll click on apply. I'll leave all the other settings as they are for now. When I click on that, you're going to see down here in the preview that has now made the background transparent, which of course is what you were going to want if we're going to use this picture of this arrow as a cursor instead of the one that we've used before. Now, with this game pointer still selected inside the project, I'm going to go up to Game Object and choose Create Other, and I'm now going to create a new type of game object that we have not used in the past called a GUI texture. So I select that, and you'll notice what happens when I do that is that image of that game pointer gets popped right into the middle of our screen inside the game view. Now, if you're in the scene view, you won't see it. But if you switch to the game view, you'll see there it is as this giant image sitting right in the middle of the screen. Now, that image will not change its resolution, even if our screen, meaning the resolution of our game, changes. So look, if I hit play, it's still sitting there right in the middle. It hasn't changed its size, but the size of our game itself is set to 1024 by 768. Okay? So this is an important thing to remember, that this GUI texture will stay a constant dimension, a constant resolution, even if the dimensions of your game change. So we're going to play around with that concept a little bit. You remember that in the past assignments, when you publish your game out for Windows, we've had it set up so that a resolution window comes up when the player starts the game, and they can actually change the resolution of the game. So imagine that they change it to be a really low resolution, and you've got this custom cursor that's going to make the custom cursor seem really big. So we're going to play around a little bit with this. So just leave this as it is for now. What I want you to do is we're going to create another new game object. So go to Game Object, Create Empty, and we're going to call this one Control Center. Now remember, I talked earlier about the idea of having a sort of a master script, like a dashboard for taking care of game level inputs and outputs. So this is one of those kinds of scripts as well, just like the script holder that we used earlier, but that was sort of a temporary one. All right, so we've got a new game object called Control Center. Then we're going to create a new script. So I'm going to select my Adventure Scripts folder, choose Create, and choose JavaScript. And the script that you're going to create now is going to follow with this idea of being a script that's going to manage things happening in the game. So we're going to call the script Game Manager. Open it up. And I've got lots and lots of code in here because I've got code that we're going to need later on in the assignment. What we're going to focus on right here is just this piece right here called function awake. In fact, to make things a little clearer, what I'll do for now is I'll comment out all of this other stuff that we're going to be doing later on, and we'll build our way up to those pieces. Okay, so the only piece we're using right now is function awake. And what is this awake? This is not something that we've used in the past. Well, we've used update, and we just played a minute ago with start. Right? Update I'm sorry, awake is a function that gets called when the game first starts, but before any of the objects in the game are sort of created and placed inside the game. All right? So awake starts right at the very beginning of things happening. And we want that to take place right as our game starts, awakes, because we want to, in this case, set the resolution of the screen to 1024 by 768. So this will make sure that the resolution of the screen is going to stay consistent across different platforms, so that our resolution for our cursor won't look odd if the resolution of the game were smaller or lower, for example. Okay, so we've got this function in the awake. We have the awake function with this call to a built-in function called setResolution. We're setting it to 1024 by 768. So I'm going to save that, come back into Unity, and let's see, I may need to redo some of this because I've got my script set up for later on in the game. Alright, so we've got our game manager script that we've just created, and I'm going to grab it and I'm going to drop it onto that control center game object that we just made. So control center. So just a reminder again, I want to say one more time about this awake function that we were playing with versus the start function. The awake function gets called before the start function. An awake function is usually used when you want to set up some sort of initial parameters for your game, essentially before anything else happens. Now, awake is called after objects that are in a given scene are initialized, so that you sort of know if there are objects that need to be there at the beginning of the game, that they'll be there so that you can communicate with those game objects when you use the awake function. So the sequence would be, if you want something to happen right as the game's getting going, you use awake. Start comes just after that. Okay. So we've attached our game manager script to the control center, and the only thing it does is set the resolution of our game. In my game view here, I'm going to maximize on play and hit play. And really all this is going to do is just make sure that the resolution is set to 1024 by 768. Well, that's great. We've got the resolution set, so we don't have to worry about that, but our custom cursor is still gigantic, right? So we're going to want to change the size of that cursor. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my game pointer, and you see where we've got this pixel inset section here? I'm going to change the X. Let's see. Actually, let's first change the size of this thing. Right now it's 256 by 256. That's the size of this. Let's drop it down to 32 by 32. Now it's really small. And then we're going to change this pixel inset piece to minus 16, which is half of that 32, and minus 16 as well, which is half of that 32. And then you'll see that our image is showing right in the middle of the screen. So let's hit play. And if I sit here, I'm still seeing this cursor. We'll have to mess with that a little later. But now when I move, the system cursor, as you remember, goes away, and now the system cursor goes away, and now we see this custom cursor sitting here. Okay, so now we've got to find a way to connect this system cursor and this custom cursor. But I want to do something else as well. You'll see that this custom cursor that we've got in the middle of the screen looks a little rough. The reason it looks rough is that we took a really big image and we scaled it down here in the GUI texture section. And when we do that, sometimes Unity is pretty good at doing that, other times it's not so hot at doing that. In this case, it doesn't look particularly good. So it might be a better idea to use a smaller cursor to start with rather than this big one that we were using. So thankfully, we've got a smaller one in that zip file that we had with this unit, there is another image called game pointer small. So what we're going to do is simply replace the image. So you'll see that I've got the game pointer selected in the hierarchy. I look at the inspector. There's the GUI texture section. You remember we took that big image and converted it into a GUI texture. I'm just going to grab the game pointer small and take it and drop it on top of that image. Now you look in the center of the screen, and we're using the small version of this so it's less jagged looking, and we can leave everything else the same way. Now let's get to work with a script that will make this custom cursor move in sync with the system cursor, even though we won't see the system cursor. All right. So let's go to our scripts, select your script folder, choose Create and JavaScript, and we're going to this time create a script called Custom Cursor, which I've already created here. Okay, the part we're going to work with right now is the update function. And what the update function is going to do is it's going to set a variable, and that variable is going to contain the current position of the system cursor. That's input.mouse position. This is a built-in, again, function of input. Then we're going to take GUI texture, which is going to be the custom cursor that we've got, which is a GUI texture, and it's going to grab the pixel inset. Remember, we were just playing with that by setting the pixel inset size 32 by 32. And it's going to take the x-coordinate of that image, and it's going to set it equal to the x-coordinate of the mouse, basically. And we'll do the same thing for the y-coordinate, only we're going to offset it a little bit. And what this will do is cause it so that the pointer on our custom cursor, this guy right here, will be matched up with the pointer of the system cursor. If we didn't do this minus 32, what would happen is that this custom cursor would be sort of lined up roughly like this, so that the pointer of our system cursor would be lined up with the sort of center of this custom cursor. Okay, and that's all we're going to do. So it's in an update function. So as we're moving our cursor, our regular cursor around on the screen, it's going to just in lockstep move that custom cursor along with it. So let's save that. So we're going to take the custom cursor script and take it and drop it onto our game pointer. Check that the position in the transform is set in right now it's set to 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. Let's change that to 0, 0, and it's going to drop it down here in the left corner. Okay? And let's go into our game manager script here. Open that one up. And I'm going to add in a start function. And that start function is simply going to turn off the system cursor as soon as the game starts. So we're doing a couple things now in this game manager. We're setting the resolution. Then we're going to turn off the system cursor, and we're going to do something else here in just a minute. But for now, let's just do these pieces. Come back in. And I don't actually need the script holder one that we did before, the hide cursor. We're not going to use that because now it's being taken over by the game manager, so I'm just disabling it. You can actually just get rid of it if you want. Maybe I'll just delete it. Hit play, and now when we start, as soon as I click, system cursor disappears, and as I move my mouse around, that custom cursor moves with it, and then as I move around I can continue to do that. Okay. So we're getting pretty close. Again, I deleted that script holder. We didn't really need that one. And I'm going to go to my game pointer script. And I'm going to continue to play around a little bit to modify how this works. Let's open up our custom cursor script. And what I want to do is I'm going to initially turn off that custom cursor. So we've used the start function before. Let's use that start function again. This time what I'm going to do in the start function is I'm going to turn off that GUI texture when we first start the game. All right, so I'll save all of that. Come back into my game, make sure there are no errors. Now when I start the game, I'm just sitting here, and when I click, there is no cursor, right? We've got to find a way now to turn that on. Now we've got no cursor at all. So let's do that next. Before we get into write a script that is going to let us turn our custom cursor GUI texture on and off, let me explain briefly, why did we just do this? Well, I went into my custom cursor script and I set it up so that when the object first appears inside the game, which is right at the beginning of the game in our case, I'm turning it off. Well, our ultimate goal, if you remember, is that we're going to replace the system cursor with the custom cursor. But we want the custom cursor to disappear when the player is moving through the scene, and we want the custom cursor to reappear when the player stops so that she can click on objects inside the game. We started all this off with that simple script, if you remember, that turned on and off the system cursor. Okay? Well, we got rid of that script now, so we need to create a new script that is going to allow us to turn on and off the custom cursor. That's what we're doing next. And to do this, we're going to make use of object-to-object communication. We've used this very important concept in an earlier activity, an earlier assignment for the course. We want to allow different objects to communicate with each other. It's a very efficient way of making things happen inside your game. And that's what we're going to do now, working between actually 3 different scripts. So let me show this. We've got already in our game, we've got our control center, right? And the control center has a script on it called Game Manager. So let me show you that again. So here's our control center. Here's our Game Manager script. Right now we're using it with an awake function that's setting the resolution. We're using a start function that is turning off the system controller because we don't want to show it at all throughout our game. And then we're also going to use it with an update function in just a few minutes, and that update function is going to then turn on and off the GUI texture. Okay. Then we've got another game object, which is our game pointer, and it has the custom cursor script attached to it. So let's take a look at that. Our game pointer object with our custom cursor. We've already started using this one. We're using a start function, and the start function is turning off the custom cursor, that GUI texture. That's our start. We're also going to use our update function. We're already starting to use that, and we're using it to reposition that GUI texture so that it follows along with the default built-in cursor as you move around the screen. And then in a few minutes we're going to add our new custom function. Mostly up to now we've been using the built-in Unity functions, but we're going to write our own function, which of course you can do to add a lot of power to your games. And this custom function is going to change the color of our custom cursor when we roll over specific objects inside our game, which gets us to the last piece of our object-to-object communication that we're about to set up. We're going to create some objects that we want to react to the custom cursor when it rolls over them. And so we're going to start by creating just a cube. And we're going to add a script onto that that's going to react to the mouse rolling over it, the mouse rolling off of it. And in order to change the color of this custom cursor, we're going to send a message over to this custom cursor. So we're going to be communicating between these two. And here, we're going to be communicating between our game manager and this guy in order to turn the visibility of this one on and off. So we've got communication between the object and the pointer, and between our control center and the pointer. So let's go and set all that stuff up next. We're going to start by modifying our game manager script so that it will communicate with the game pointer in order to turn the custom cursor on and off. So we're going to go into our game manager script, and we're going to modify it to add some new elements. So I'll show you what that looks like now. All right, let me walk through what we've got going on in this modified version. First, we're going to declare a public variable that's a Boolean, and you will remember from your programming classes that a Boolean is simply a true or false variable. And in our case, it's going to be named navigating, and this is going to be a true or false variable that is true when the player is moving through a scene or looking around with the mouse look, and is false when they are just sitting still. Then we're going to have a private variable, game pointer, which is going to point to that custom cursor. Have another public variable called mouse over color, which we're going to set to green by default, and then that will be the color of the custom cursor when we roll over objects that we want to react to that custom cursor being over them. We're going to have a public variable named material that is going to allow us to change the material applied to the custom cursor or change the material applied to the object that gets rolled over. In this video, we're not actually going to use this, but if you read the chapter, at the very end of the chapter, there's a section that describes the use of this variable. Then we have our same awake function that we used before that's setting the resolution of the monitor. We have our start function. Part of it we're using already. We're turning off that system cursor. Then we're going to add one new statement in here that is going to have a variable, this game pointer variable, and we're going to point it to another game object. And the way we're going to find that other game object is by searching for its name, game pointer. Now, let me show you how this works. If you look up into Unity, you'll remember earlier we created a game object called game pointer. Here's its name. So we can actually locate game objects from any script in Unity attached to any game object. You can find another game object by using this gameObject.find and then as a string passing the name of that game object. Obviously, if we're doing this, you need to make sure that the name that you're looking for here matches the name that you gave to the object. If for some reason your game pointer has a different name, maybe it has a space in it, or it doesn't have capitals, or it has a totally different name, then you'll need to make sure that here in this start script, what you've got here matches the name of the object that you're trying to find. Otherwise, it won't find it. Then, a new addition is the update function for our game manager. In the update function, we're going to have this first if statement that should look very familiar. This is the same if statement we used in our customized first-person controller in the earlier assignment to detect when the player was either moving or when they were trying to look around. Okay? So we're going to put in that same if statement, and if any of these things is true, we've got a series of or conditions here. So if any of one of these or more of these is true, we're going to set this navigating Boolean to true, meaning that yes, the player is moving. And what do we want to do if these things are true? If the player is moving, then we're going to grab game pointer, right, which is that GUI texture of that custom cursor, and we're going to find the component attached to it called GUI texture, which is that image of that game pointer, and we're going to turn it off. We're going to set enabled to false. What that will do is, through programming, it will deselect this little box so that the GUI texture will no longer be visible. So the main point is, when the player is moving, we're not going to show the custom cursor, and we're going to set this Boolean navigating to true to let the whole program know, anybody who wants to know, we're on the move. And we'll make use of this Boolean in other scripts. So what if the player is not moving? So that's our else statement. We'll set the navigating Boolean to false to let anybody who wants to know that we're not moving. And then we will go back to that game pointer object. We'll look for its GUI texture component, and we'll set it to enabled. So we'll basically turn it back on. So that's what's happening in our new modified Game Manager script. So I'm going to save that Game Manager script. Make sure there are no errors when you come back into Unity. And your Game Manager script is already applied to the control center, but now look at the inspector and you'll see it's changed a little bit. Now it's got this public variable called navigating, so you can actually turn it on and off yourself, but we're going to leave it off. It's got the color that we set to green. This is a built-in function of Unity. And so that if we want to, we could change that. So instead of green, maybe we want blue. Okay. And it's got this mouse over material that we're not actually going to use, but is available there if you want to follow some of the more complicated sections of our chapter. Great, so let's try this out. Hit play. Click inside to get rid of the system cursor, and now you'll see I'm not moving, and so I can see the custom cursor, and when I move around my mouse, it moves with it. But the second I start to look, I'm holding down the Shift key, it disappears, or if I begin moving, it disappears, and then when I stop moving, it reappears. So far, so good. So we've taken care of part one of our object-to-object communication, which was modifying the Game Manager script. And so we've got it so that our cursor is not visible when we start, and then when we move, then we see the custom cursor and it moves along just fine. And that's pretty much self-contained right now. Next, we're going to modify our game pointer script so that we can change the cursor color and also get it set up to communicate between the cursor and the objects that we want to react to the cursor. So let's go and look at the custom cursor script. I've already gone through and made some modifications, and I'll talk through exactly what's going on with these modifications. Let me shrink this down a little bit. All right. First of all, I'm setting a public variable, which is called control center, and it's looking for a game object. This is going to allow us to communicate between this custom cursor and the control center. We did the same thing with our earlier script, with our game manager script, by using the game object find, where we basically went out and hunted for another game object by using its name. We're taking a different approach here that works just the same way, where instead of going and hunting for the object in runtime, we're going to set that game object in the editor by making it a public variable that we can then see in the inspector and then drag the appropriate object and drop it in the slot, which of course in our case will be the control center. Then we're going to have a private variable which is going to be a color. This is going to be the color that we want the custom cursor to change to when we roll over an object in our game. So we're going to call it mouse over color, give it the type of color. We have our start function here where we've got our we're turning off that GUI texture. Then we're going to add a piece to that start function where we're going to set this mouse over color equal to the component in our control center, which we're setting right here. We're going to search for a specific component attached to that control center called Game Manager, and then we're going to look for a variable that's inside that component called mouse over color. That's pretty confusing, so let me show you what I mean. Here's our control center. You'll remember that we just modified the Game Manager script, and one of the modifications we gave it was we gave it a public variable called mouse over color, and it was set initially to green. Now I've gone in and screwed with it. I changed it to something else. I can make it whatever I want. So what we're doing in this custom cursor script is we're going to go find this. Here's the control center. We're going to get a component. We're going to pass the name of the component, which is Game Manager. We're going to look for a variable called mouse over color. That's this one. And whatever color that is, we're going to grab it and set that to be this mouse over color that we're going to use here. So basically we're saying when we roll over some object, we're going to change the color of our cursor, in this case, to red. It can be whatever you want because you can change it here. Then we have our update function. That hasn't changed. We set that earlier. This is just making the custom cursor follow around the screen as you move the mouse. But now we've got this new custom function that we are going to use to change that cursor color. So we called it cursor color change, and we're going to pass it a Boolean, true or false. And if that Boolean is true, then we're going to change the color of the GUI texture to match whatever we set over here. And if it's false, we're going to set the color to white. So this custom cursor is not getting called, right? We've got this custom cursor script attached out here to our game pointer, but we're not actually calling this custom cursor, this change color one from here. So what we'll need to do next is call this function from somewhere so that we can make this color change when we roll over specific objects in our game. So I'm going to save that script. I'm going to come back into my game. And now if I look at my game pointer where we have this custom cursor script attached, you'll see that now it's asking me to find that control center object. So there it is. I click and drag and drop it on there. Right? Now so far nothing will happen. Nothing new will happen because we're not calling that script. All that happens now is what happened before. We move around and the custom cursor disappears and we stop and it reappears. Okay. In order to see the changes that we just made to this custom cursor script, we need to go to the third and final part of our object-to-object communication setup, which is this part right here. We're going to add in a cube object. We're going to create a new script called Interactor, and then we're going to call on a couple of built-in Unity functions, mouse enter and mouse exit, and in those functions we're going to call to that cursor color change function. So let's do that. Coming up into my hierarchy, and I'm choosing create game object, and I'm going to create a cube. Let's find where we place that. It's right on top of my first person controller, so I'll move it sort of over here so that I can get to it quickly. Okay, so it's sitting over there. Doesn't really matter, you can just call it cube for now if you want. Then we're going to create a new script. So select your scripts folder, and as always, do a create and JavaScript. And this new script is going to be called, we're going to call the new script Interactor. So here it is. In the Interactor script, we're going to have a public variable called GamePointer that is going to point to this custom cursor object that we've got, the game pointer object. All right, makes sense. We're calling it GamePointer, and we're going to point it to our GamePointer object. Then we've got a mouse enter function and a mouse exit function. In the mouse enter function, we're going to go out to that GamePointer object, there it is, and we're going to send it a message. And the message we're going to send it is cursor color change true. Okay. So how does that work? We're going to go find this game object, and then in that game object we're going to send a message which basically is going to go to this game object and is going to search. And what is it going to search for? It's going to search for a function named cursor color change, or whatever it is we pass to that object. And then it's going to run it. Basically, we're going to pass it the value for this Boolean. Okay, one more time. What will happen is when we roll over, that's what this means on mouse enter, when we roll over the object to which this script is attached, we're going to find this object and we're going to send it a message which is the name of a function that is attached to this game object, and we're going to pass it this variable, true, which is going to get picked up here, right here, and it's going to change or set this variable to true. Then, when we move our mouse off of the object to which this is attached, we're going to again find this object, send it a message which is going to find a function with this name, and then pass it the variable false, which will then set our will then set the message false to our color cursor change script here. Alright, so now we've got the script set up. Now we need to make that actually happen. So we're going to take that Interactor script and we're going to attach it to that cube. Alright, got the Interactor script, got it attached to the cube. Now watch what happens. I come in and I play the game. When I move around, nothing happens, but when I roll over here, aha, I'm getting an exception, which you'll get too, so we need to get that fixed. Look at our cube object. We attached that script that we just created, but you'll remember one of the things it's asking for as a public variable is for us to point it to that game pointer object, to that custom cursor. So let's do that. I'll grab it and drop it on there. Now our game should be happy. We hit play, turn over here, and now when we roll over that cube, you'll see our cursor changes to the color that I had set, which was red, and when I roll off it, it changes back to white on